everyone, good morning and welcome back to Taylor's News. Today we're diving into a hot topic that's been stirring conversations online. A recent case involving a university lecturer charged with sexually assaulting two male students has reignited public concerns over sexual crimes against men in Malaysia. From 2013 to 2017, statistics from the Royal Malaysian Police showed that 257 men had reported being victims of sexual harassment in the workplace. And in 2023 alone, there were 135 cases of male victims, making up 4% of all sexual harassment cases. This figure is significant given the amount of other cases left unreported. With that, netizens have reignited debate on whether Malaysia's rape laws, particularly Section 375 and Section 377 of the Penal Code, are in need of a reform to include and protect male victims. On the line with us today is Mr. Heng, a reputable criminal lawyer. Let's hear what he has to say.
Thank you for having me. The current rape law in Malaysia is actually governed by Section 375 of the Penal Code, which reads that a man is said to commit rape who, except in the case hereinafter expected, has sexual intercourse with a woman under circumstances following and under any of the following description, which contains 7 situations that an offence of rape can be charged. So Section 375 should be read together with Section 10, which states that the word man denotes a male human being of any age and the word woman denotes a female human being of any age. This is in contrast with the Interpretation Act 1948 and 1967, which states that when interpreting laws, words and expression importing the masculine gender include females. Thus, in Malaysia, it can be seen that rape can only be committed by males and the victims can only be females. So from Section 375, we can see that there are actually 4 elements to establish rape. First of all, the accused must be a man. Second of all, the victim must be a woman. Thirdly, there must be sexual intercourse, which is penetration. And lastly, one of the circumstances under Section 375 might actually be satisfied. Section 376 further provided the punishment for rape, which is imprisonment for up to 20 years and whipping. There are also alternative charges for sexual offences, which includes Section 377A, carnal intercourse against the order of nature, which is gender-specific like Section 375, and other offences that are not gender-specific include Section 354, assault or use of criminal force to a person with intent to outrage modesty, and Section 377C, committing carnal intercourse against the order of nature without consent, together with Section 377CA, sexual connection by object, and Section 377D, outrages on decency. And you can look at the punishment in the chart over there. There is also the Sexual Offences Against Children Act 2017, which applies to individuals under the age of 18. And all the offences are actually gender neutral, meaning that the offences are not restricted to a particular gender. So for example, Section 10 of the Act reads that any person who accesses or has in possession or control any child pornography commits an offence. So it can be seen that the Act uses the term any person instead of stating a particular gender. However, the offence of rape cannot be found in this Act.
Thank you, Mr. Heng, for the thorough explanation. But how exactly does Malaysia's position compare to that of the UK? As a fellow Commonwealth nation, it's insightful to draw parallels. Can I invite Ms. Chloe, an exceptional academician in this field, to answer our question?
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share this crucial discussion on the need to reform the definition of rape under Section 375 of the Penal Code. As an academician, it is both a professional and moral obligation to question whether our legal definitions reflect the realities of modern society and, more importantly, whether they offer justice to all victims regardless of gender. So, let us begin by examining how other jurisdictions have approached this issue. Firstly, we have the UK. The UK's Sexual Offences Act 2003 provides a partially progressive step in the right direction. It defines rape in a way that acknowledges male victims by using gender-neutral language when referring to the victim. However, the definition still hinges on penile penetration, and this effectively excludes women from being legally recognized as perpetrators of rape unless they possess a surgically constructed penis. In the case of R and Ismail, the courts acknowledged the need to treat all forms of penetration, vaginal, anal, and oral, equally. But the requirement for penile penetration reveals that the UK's approach is only partially inclusive and it is still anchored in outdated gender assumptions. Next, we have an Asian country, which is Bhutan, which stands out as a compelling example of consistent legislative drafting. Section 177 of Bhutan's Penal Code fully uses gender-neutral terms such as defendant and person, and this allows for the recognition of rape regardless of the gender identity of either the victim or the perpetrator. Bhutan's law does not assume a default gender dynamic, and this is significant because it reflects an understanding that consent and not gender should be the focal point of sexual offenses. And last but not least, we have the United States of America, particularly after the FBI's 2013 redefinition of rape, which has taken a more inclusive and also modern approach. So this revised definition recognizes rape as penetration, no matter how slight, of the vagina, anus, with any body part or object, or oral penetration by a sex organ of another person without consent. Notably, it uses the term person instead of gender-specific language, and this allows the law to cover a wide range of sexual violence scenarios, including those involving male victims, female perpetrators, or any situation involving transgender and non-binary individuals. The American model thus reflects a broader and more progressive understanding of rape in contemporary society. These examples demonstrate that a global shift, most importantly, that countries are progressively moving away from gendered assumptions in their rape laws. The reforms reflect a growing recognition that sexual violence is not limited by gender or sexual orientation, but rather the law must protect all individuals equally, be it men, women, or transgender individuals. That's all from my part, and now I will pass it back to our moderator, Zi.
Thank you, Ms. Chloe. It does seem that our law on rape in Malaysia is outdated and ripe for reform. Still, there are those who argue against a reform, with the most notable one being our local regional politician, Ms. Chew. Ms. Chew, could you share your thoughts against the reform?
Thank you for having me today. First, let me say, as a policymaker, I do not support the move to reform Malaysia's rape laws to make them gender neutral. This is not because I believe male victims don't deserve justice, but on the contrary, I believe they already have legal protection under our current laws, which give them adequate protection. Let's look at what we already have. Malaysia's legal framework already protects male victims, such as under Section 377C of the Penal Code. Any non-consensual carnal intercourse, regardless of the victim's gender, is criminalized. The penalties are also up to 20 years imprisonment and whipping, which is the same as rape under Section 375. Apart from that, Section 377CA, which covers all non-penal penetration into vagina or anus, as well as 377D and 354, which apply to both genders with the use of the word whoever or any person. These laws have been also affirmed by Malaysia's highest court, the Federal Court, in landmark cases such as Sukma Dharma 1 and also Iki Putra. We also have the Sexual Offences Against Children Act 2017, in which the wordings of the sections are shown here as completely gender neutral. Male and female children are protected, and both male and female perpetrators can be prosecuted. Now, critics might say, but it's not called rape. But my response is, does the label change the level of justice served? What matters here is that all perpetrators are prosecuted and the victims, they get the closure they deserve. Let's also be realistic. Countries such as South Africa, they introduced gender-neutral rape laws as far back as 2007. And yet, still today, male victims remain grossly underreported. By 2019, there were still no official statistics for male rape. Why is this the case? Because the real barrier here is not the legal term, it's social stigma. Male victims are still very scared to report due to fear of shame. Changing a law is not enough to change mindsets. In Malaysia, we still associate masculinity with dominance and strength. A man coming forward as a victim of sexual assault is sadly still met with mockery and also disbelief. Changing a law will not change those attitudes. We also need to consider the potential unintended consequences. Redefining rape may dilute focus on female victimization. In a country where women still face high rates of sexual violence, we must be very careful not to undermine the visibility of women's issues in the legal system. So yes, obviously we can support male victims, but let's do it wisely. The law, as it stands, already has tools to protect male rape victims. It is now a matter of application, not changing legislation.
Thank you for your perspective, Ms. Chu. While I understand your concerns, I respectfully hold a different view. In my opinion, Section 375 of the Penal Code is discriminatory in nature, as it assumes that only men can be perpetrators of rape and only women can be victims of rape. This outdated perspective ignores the reality that sexual violence is not about gender. It's about power and control by the powerful over the powerless. Article 8, Clause 2 of the Federal Constitution expressly prohibits gender-based discrimination, yet Section 375 denies men the very protection from rape solely on the basis of their gender, bolstered by cultural perceptions of what men can and cannot do. One popular assumption is that men, being anatomically stronger, cannot be raped. This is simply wrong and unjustifiable. As Professor McKeever rightly pointed out, men too can fail to give consent for many reasons including physical resistance, mental disability, or unconsciousness. It is therefore unjust to rely on groundless gender stereotypes to argue that male victims do not require legal protections. Being physically strong does not make someone immune to trauma or violation. Therefore, I strongly believe that the law on rape should focus on consent and only consent as the sole determinant of rape. Treating the same offense differently because of gender is to undermine justice and to perpetuate gender inequality in the legal system. Additionally, under the rule of law, all individuals and institutions must be held accountable to the same legal standard. However, gender-specific rape laws exclude male victims from the legal definition of rape, thereby denying them equal access to justice and legal recourse. This leads to many cases being pigeonholed as sexual harassment or sodomy, with the latter carrying an additional stigma of its own. Female perpetrators, on the other hand, can never be held accountable under Section 375 even if they commit rape. This effectively renders them immune from prosecution under rape laws. At its core, criminal law exists to preserve social order and protect individuals' rights and liberties. Article 5 of the Federal Constitution guarantees the right to life and personal liberty, which has been interpreted to include the right to live with dignity. Nonetheless, gender-specific rape laws deprives men the right to live with dignity, have sexual integrity, or autonomy over their own body. This is thus a violation of human rights, and such violation should not be measured or prejudiced by one's gender. If we truly believe in equality before the law, then the law must reflect that belief. That concludes my opinion. Now I'd like to pass the floor to Ms. Kee, a passionate advocate and legal expert on this issue. Ms. Kee, we'd love to hear your thoughts.
Hello everyone, thanks for having me here. I personally agree that Malaysia's rape laws should not remain gender-specific as it creates lacuna. Section 375 Penal Code only recognizes men as perpetrators and women as victims. Section 377 Capital A also only penalizes sexual offences if they involve introduction with penis. This excludes the male victims from appropriate legal protection and shields the female or transgender perpetrators from legal consequences. For example, if a transgender man rapes a woman or a transgender woman is raped, both scenarios fall into a legal grey area unless gender has been legally reassigned according to the Specific Relief Act 1950. Also, male rape victims lack of specific recourse under Section 377 as it merely criminalizes all acts of sodomy regardless the elements of consent. By separating the offences into different categories of rape and carnal intercourse against the order of nature, the laws imply a hierarchy of harm in rape cases of women and men. Similarly, the law is so unsatisfied as the sexual offences against male children under the age of 18 does not label as rape in Sexual Offences Against Children Act 217. To further illustrate my stand, I emphasize that legal reform is crucial not just for prosecution, but for symbolic recognition. Male victims often go unrecognized, both socially and legally, leaving them without sufficient legal recourse or societal support, and causes rape cases against men underreported. Societal myths such as men must have consented if they had an erection reflect a flawed understanding of voluntary consent. Medical research reveals that men can show involuntary arousal through manipulation, just like women. Therefore, the notion of consent should be constructed identically in all cases of male and female rape to include a person's freedom and capacity to make the choice. Moreover, traditional sex creep and patriarchal norms significantly discourage men from reporting rape. Many male victims remain silent because of their fear of having their masculinity undermined. Even when they did disclose what had happened, they were not taken seriously.
Thank you, Ms. Kee. I think we can now all agree that a reform on the rape law is imminent. But how should we do so? Ms. Chloe, perhaps we can hear from you.
To conclude, our current law under Section 375 is outdated as it fails to reflect the complexity of sexual violence in today's society. Based on the comparative analysis, the following reforms are urgently needed. Firstly, the removal of gender references. The terms man and woman in the definition of rape should be replaced with person to reflect gender neutrality and inclusivity. Secondly, expansion of acts constituting rape. Rape should include oral and anal penetration and not just vaginal. Additionally, it should cover penetration with any body part or object as long as it is done without consent. And last but not least, the recognition of all victim-perpetrator combinations. The law should recognize that any person can be a victim or a perpetrator of rape. Reform of rape laws is needed to deter all potential perpetrators so that they do not escape punishment due to technicalities as to what their gender is. When the law explicitly acknowledges male rape, it validates victims' experiences, advocates for human rights and gender equality, which aligns with the international obligation and affirms the central harm in all rape cases, which is the violation of sexual autonomy.